You're standing in a boatyard. Two hulls sitting side by side. One is steel, one is fiberglass, and the broker just leaned in and told you the steel one will cost you $8,000 you'll regret. That number is a lie. Or at least, it's only half the truth. A steel hull, cared for the old way, can outlast you and cost less over a lifetime than the shiny fiberglass everyone tells you to buy. I didn't believe that for 1 second. I spent years nodding along with the doc's talk, repeating the same warnings everyone repeats. Then I started testing it myself, and I was wrong. Stay with me, because there's a maintenance record from a ship launched in 1843 that quietly destroys the whole $8,000 scare story. And there's a rust treatment you can mix in your own kitchen this weekend. This applies to you whether you own a boat, a truck, a set of tools, or just a rusty gate in your backyard. Let me tell you how I got here. About 12 years ago, I was walking the docks in a little tidal harbor up the coast, and I stopped in front of an old steel ketch with a hand-painted name on the transom. The owner was up on deck drinking coffee, and I asked him the question everybody asks, "Isn't steel a nightmare?" He just laughed and pointed at a fiberglass boat 2 slips down with cracks spidering across the deck. He said, "That one's 10 years younger than mine, son, and it's already dying." I walked away thinking he was fooling himself. I was the one fooling myself. So let's start with that $8,000 number, because it's the wall that stops almost everyone. Here's the thing nobody explains properly. When people say a steel hull costs $8,000, they're talking about one specific job. It's called a blast and recoat. Every 10 to 15 years, a steel hull may need to be stripped down to bare metal, usually by sandblasting, and then coated again with layers of epoxy paint. That's the number. That's the bogeyman. $8,000, sometimes more if you pay a yard to do all of it. And when you hear it like that, cold, with no context, of course you run to fiberglass. I did the math in my head that day on the docks and thought, why would anyone sign up for that? But here's what the broker will never do. He'll never tell you what the fiberglass boat costs over the same 15 years. Because fiberglass isn't free to keep either. It just fails quietly, in ways nobody puts a scary round number on. Fiberglass gets something called osmotic blistering. Water works its way through the outer layer, called the gel coat, and reacts with the materials underneath. And the hull grows blisters like a bad case of acne below the waterline. The fix for a serious case? You peel the entire outer skin off the boat, let it dry for months, and relaminate it. On a mid-sized cruising boat, that job runs from $10,000 to $25,000. Nobody puts that on a bumper sticker. Nobody warns you at the dock. So the first time I actually sat down and compared the real 15-year cost of both, instead of the scary story of one and the silence around the other, the gap started to close fast. The $8,000 for steel suddenly didn't look like a punishment. It looked like a known, predictable, budgetable number. And in boats, predictable is worth more than gold. But that raised a bigger question in my mind, and it's the one that really sent me down this road. If steel is so predictable and so tough, why did almost everyone abandon it? Why is the whole industry built on fiberglass now? That answer goes back further than you'd think, and it's where this story stops being about money and starts being about something that was quietly taken from us. Let me take you back to 1843. A ship called the Great Britain slid into the water in Bristol, England. She was designed by a man named Isambard Kingdom Brunel, and she was the first large ship built with an iron hull and driven by a propeller. People at the time thought Brunel was mad. Everyone knew iron sinks. How could you build a ship out of the one thing that obviously goes to the bottom? It sounds ridiculous now, but that was the common sense of the day. That ship is still here. You can walk up and touch her right now, in a dry dock in Bristol, more than 180 years later. In 1846, she ran hard aground on the coast of Ireland and sat there, being pounded by the surf for almost a year. A wooden ship would have been kindling in a week. A fiberglass boat would have been confetti. They dug her out, floated her off, and she sailed on for decades. She hauled thousands of emigrants to Australia. She served as a warehouse. She was even scuttled and left to rot in the Falkland Islands. And then in 1970, they towed the old hull all the way back to Bristol on a barge, and she's been preserved as a museum ever since. I bring her up for one reason. When I finally read through the accounts of her construction and her survival, the thing that struck me wasn't how special she was. It was how ordinary the idea had become. For roughly 100 years, from the middle of the 1800s well into the 1900s, iron and then steel were simply how you built a serious ship that was meant to survive real oceans. It wasn't exotic, it wasn't for daredevils, it was the trusted, standard, sensible choice. Working boats, fishing boats, cargo boats, the boats that fed families and carried nations, were steel. So what happened? How did the standard, sensible material become the thing brokers warn you about? Fiberglass happened, and I want to be fair, because fiberglass is genuinely clever. It came out of the chemical boom after the Second World War. By the early 1960s, boat builders realized something that changed everything. With a wooden or steel boat, every single hull is built one at a time by skilled craftsmen, and that costs a fortune in labor. But with fiberglass, you build one expensive mold, and then you can pop out hull after hull after hull, faster and cheaper, with far less skilled labor. Do you see what that did? It wasn't about making a better boat for you. It was about making a cheaper boat to manufacture. Fiberglass won the boatyard, not the ocean. It won because it was better for the people building and selling boats, and the story that it was also better for the people sailing them got told afterward, loud and often, until we all just believed it. By the 1970s, fiberglass had taken over the recreational market almost completely. And within one generation, the knowledge of how to live with a steel hull, how to maintain it cheaply, how to catch small problems before they became big ones, started slipping away. Not because it was bad knowledge, because there was suddenly nobody left teaching it, and a whole industry with every reason to let it be forgotten. That's the part that got under my skin. The $8,000 scare story isn't just wrong, it's the echo of a sales pitch from 60 years ago, repeated by people who never questioned it, aimed at people who never got told the other side. But knowing the history didn't fix my real fear, because there's one word that hangs over every steel boat conversation, and it's the word that kept me from buying one for years: rust. And that fear, it turns out, is where the whole thing gets interesting. Here's what I used to picture. I imagined a steel boat as a car left out in a field. You know the look. Orange, flaking, crumbling, eaten alive from the outside in. I thought owning steel meant watching my investment slowly dissolve. And I'll be honest, that image nearly won. It kept me in fiberglass longer than it should have. Then an old welder set me straight, and it flipped everything I thought I knew. He told me the dangerous rust on a steel boat almost never comes from the outside. The outside is the easy part. The outside gets painted, gets watched, gets scrubbed, gets looked at every time you're in the water. The real enemy is on the inside, and it's not even really the sea. It's condensation. Think about it. A steel hull in cold water, with warm, humid air inside the cabin from cooking and breathing and living. That warm air hits the cold steel and it sweats, just like a cold glass of tea on a summer porch. That moisture collects in the low, hidden places, under the floorboards, behind the lining, in the bilge, where you never look. That's where a neglected steel boat dies. Not from some dramatic wave. From its own breath, in the dark, over years. And the second I understood that, the whole thing stopped being scary. Because condensation isn't a mystery. It's not bad luck. It's a completely solvable problem. And people solved it decades ago with methods so simple they sound almost too easy. The old-timers did 3 things, and none of them cost $8,000. First, they insulated the inside of the hull, so the warm cabin air never touched the cold, bare steel. Spray foam does this today, but they used cork and other materials long before foam existed. No cold surface, no sweat. Second, they kept the bilge dry and ventilated, so any moisture that did form had somewhere to go instead of pooling against the metal. Third, and this is the big one, they coated the inside, not just the outside. A properly coated interior gives the moisture nothing to attack. The steel boats that rot are the ones where somebody skipped those steps to save money or time. The steel boats that last a century are the ones where somebody did the boring, cheap, unglamorous maintenance that nobody put in a brochure. And that's exactly the gap I've been trying to close for you here. Because knowing that condensation is the real enemy, and that insulation and coating and ventilation beat it, is the same kind of knowing that tells you which old hull on the hard is honest and which one is dressed up to fool you. That's the whole reason I sat down and wrote 3 books on it, and I mean wrote them myself, from years of poking around yards and being wrong out loud. In them I put the things a video can't hold, the surveyor's own quick read on a used hull before you ever write a check, the 7 spots a smiling seller steers you away from, the ordinary failures you fix yourself before lunch instead of handing to a yard, how to keep a diesel breathing past 10,000 hours, and the true annual cost ledger so nobody can scare you with a round number again. It's written for the man on a fixed income who wants one honest old boat that outlives him. If that's you, scan the QR code right there on your screen, link in the description, pinned comment for the books. Now, back to why so many careful people still walk away from steel anyway, because the maintenance was never really the problem. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right now, and this is exactly the moment I want to talk to you. You're thinking, this is fascinating, but I don't own a boat and I never will. This has nothing to do with me. I built this next part of the video specifically for you, because I promise you this is the most useful thing here. Everything I just learned about protecting steel on a boat works on every piece of steel you own on dry land. Your garden tools, the bed of your pickup truck, that wrought iron railing, the steel legs on your workbench, your barbecue, the metal fence that's already starting to bleed orange down the concrete. It's the exact same enemy and the exact same cheap defenses. Let me give you the ones I actually use now, the ones that cost almost nothing. First lesson from the boat world. Rust doesn't start on a clean, dry, coated surface. It starts where 2 things meet, where water sits, where a scratch exposes bare metal. So the single most valuable habit is to keep an eye on the edges, the corners, the low spots, the places where water lingers after rain. On my tools, that means wiping them dry before I put them away, which sounds obvious until you realize almost nobody does it. Second, and this one changed my whole garage, a thin film of oil is the cheapest rust prevention on earth. The old machinists knew this. A rag with a little oil on it, wiped over your steel tools once in a while, leaves a barrier so thin you can barely see it, and water can't get to the metal underneath. I keep an oily rag in a sealed metal tin in my shop, and I run it over my hand tools every few weeks. Tools I used to replace every few years because they rusted up now look the same as the day I bought them. That habit alone has saved me a couple $100 easy, and it takes 10 seconds. Third, ventilation. The same lesson from the boat bilge. Don't store steel in a closed, damp space where the air never moves. A closed shed with a dirt floor is a rust factory. Even cracking a vent, even a small solar fan, even just not stacking things tight against a cold wall, keeps moisture from settling in one spot and eating your metal. And the fourth one is the one I want you to remember, because it leads straight into the biggest secret of this whole video. If you already have rust, you do not have to grind it all off down to shiny metal, sweating and swearing with a wire wheel, before you can protect it. There's an older, smarter way to deal with existing rust that most people have completely forgotten, and I'm going to give it to you in full in just a minute. So even if you never set foot on a steel boat, you now have 4 habits that will protect every steel thing you own, for pennies. That's yours to keep. But here's what still bothered me, even after all of this. If steel is this manageable, if the rust problem is this solvable, why does the $8,000 story still have so much power? Why do so many good, careful, money-conscious people still walk away from steel? And that's where I found the part of this that actually made me angry. Because it's not really the maintenance cost that kills steel boats in the marketplace. It's 3 quiet forces working together, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. The first is the surveyor. When you buy a used boat, you pay for a survey, an inspection to tell you what shape it's in. And here's the problem with steel. A good survey of a steel hull requires something called an ultrasonic thickness test, where they measure exactly how thick the steel still is in dozens of spots to check for hidden thinning. It's not hard, but it takes a surveyor who actually knows steel, and those are getting rarer every year. So a lot of surveyors, faced with a steel boat, just get nervous. They write cautious reports. They flag things they don't fully understand, and a cautious report scares off buyers and lenders. The second force is insurance. Some insurers see the word steel and quietly raise their rates or add conditions, not because the boats are more likely to sink, but because the people making those decisions are working off the same tired assumptions everyone else is. The boat that survives the grounding gets punished on paper by people who've never sailed one. And the third force is resale. Because of the first two, steel boats can be harder to sell, which means they often sell for less, which means people assume they're worth less, which means they're harder to sell. It's a loop. It feeds itself. And none of it, not one part of it, is about how the boat actually performs on the water. Do you see what happened here? A material that survived being pounded on an Irish coast for a year, a material that built the ships that carried the whole world's cargo for a century, got quietly pushed to the margins. Not because it failed, because a cheaper-to-manufacture product came along, an entire industry reorganized itself around that product, and the knowledge and infrastructure that supported the old way was allowed to wither. The surveyors who understood it retired. The insurers stopped bothering to learn. The brokers repeated the scary number because it moved them toward the sale they wanted to make. That's the $8,000 answer nobody talks about. The $8,000 isn't the real cost of a steel hull. The $8,000 is the price tag they put on your fear, to keep you from asking why the toughest hull material on Earth became the one nobody recommends. And here's the flip side, the part that made me finally cross over. A steel boat's greatest maintenance is also its greatest gift. When steel is damaged, you can fix it, anywhere. A welder in almost any port in the world can cut out a bad section and weld in new steel. If you hull a fiberglass boat in a remote anchorage, you're in serious trouble, and you're looking at specialists and molds and weeks of work. If you hull a steel boat, you find someone with a welder. That's why serious long-distance sailors, the ones who go to the cold high latitudes, the ones who deliberately sail where there's ice, so many of them choose steel. They're not fools. They know exactly what I've just told you. They just kept the knowledge the rest of us lost. So now let me give you the thing I promised at the very beginning, the method that turns the whole rust fear on its head. The thing I found buried in old maintenance practice, that works on a hull and works on your garden gate, and costs almost nothing. I went looking for how they protected iron and steel before the modern chemical companies sold us expensive rust products, and the trail kept leading me back to one substance, tannic acid, tannin, the same stuff that's in strong tea, in oak bark, in oak galls. And this is where it gets genuinely old, older than the boats, older than Brunel. There's a recipe, iron gall ink, that goes back well over 1,000 years. Medieval monks wrote their manuscripts with it. It's made by combining tannin from oak galls with iron. And here's the beautiful part. When tannic acid meets rust, which is iron oxide, it doesn't just cover it up. It chemically reacts with it and converts that flaky, crumbling orange rust into a stable, hard blue-black compound called iron tannate. The same reaction that made permanent ink on medieval parchment turns destructive rust into a protective layer. Let me say that again, because when it finally clicked for me, I actually laughed out loud in my workshop. The chemistry that put words on paper that have survived 1,000 years is the same chemistry that stops rust from eating your steel. It doesn't hide the rust. It transforms it into something that protects the metal underneath. This is exactly what modern rust converters do. You can buy them in a can for good money, and they'll tell you it's advanced technology. The active ingredient in a great many of them is tannic acid, the same thing that's in the mug of tea beside you right now. Here's how you use it, and here's why I told you not to grind everything down to bare metal. First, knock off the loose, flaky rust with a wire brush. You don't need it perfect. You just want to get rid of the stuff that's actively falling off. Then you apply the tannic acid solution and let it react. As it works, you'll actually watch the orange rust darken to that blue-black. That color change is the rust being neutralized in front of your eyes. Once it's dry and converted, you paint right over it. And your paint now sits on a stable surface instead of on top of active rust that would keep spreading underneath and lift your paint off in a year. You can buy tannic acid as a powder cheaply, mix it with water, and treat rusty tools, rusty fencing, rusty truck panels, rusty anything. People restoring old cast iron pans and antique tools have used strong brewed tea for small jobs for exactly this reason. It's not a gimmick, it's the recovery of chemistry so old it predates the very idea of a rust problem being something you buy a solution for. When I first tried it, I took an old hatchet head that was so rusted I'd written it off, so orange it looked hopeless. I brushed off the loose flakes, coated it in a tannic acid solution, and left it. By the next morning it had turned dark, hard, and stable. I oiled it, put a handle back on it, and I still use that hatchet today. The thing I was going to throw in the bin. That's when I stopped seeing rust as a death sentence and started seeing it as just another thing the old knowledge already solved, long before anyone thought to sell me the answer. That's the real lesson of the steel hull. Not that everyone should run out and buy one. Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. That depends on how and where you sail. The real lesson is that the thing they told you to fear was manageable all along, and the fear itself was the product being sold. $8,000 of fear, wrapped around a material that outlasts almost everything we've replaced it with. I spent years believing the dock talk. I repeated the warnings. I paid the fiberglass premium, and I watched boats younger than that old steel ketch crack and blister and fade, while the ketch just kept sailing. The man with the coffee was right, and I was the one fooling myself. What I got back wasn't just a different opinion about boats. It was the whole habit of asking a simple question. Who benefits when I'm afraid of the cheaper, tougher, older way? If you've ever felt that quiet suspicion, standing in a store or a boatyard, that the expensive modern answer isn't really the better answer, just the more profitable one, then you already have the instinct that matters. You're the kind of person who trusts what's been tested by time over what's been polished by marketing. That instinct is worth more than any survey. Now I want to hear from you, and I mean this specifically. I told you about the tannic acid turning orange rust to blue-black. If you try it this weekend on an old tool or a rusty hinge, come back and tell me what happened. Did the color change surprise you the way it surprised me? Leave a comment and tell me. And tell me where you're watching from, because I'm always amazed at how far this reaches, from harbor towns to landlocked farms. Drop it below. This audience is quiet, and I'd love to actually hear your voice for once. If any part of this made you rethink something you thought you knew, then you belong here, because that's the whole point of what we do. This isn't a channel. It's a slow, stubborn effort to recover the practical knowledge that got buried under 60 years of things being cheaper to manufacture and easier to sell. Every video digs up one more piece of it. And I'll leave you with this loose thread for next time. If tannic acid was hiding in a mug of tea, wait until I show you what people used to seal and protect wood before waterproofing became a product on a shelf. It's sitting in most kitchens right now, it costs almost nothing, and it was in an old farmhouse manual I found that I still can't believe isn't common knowledge. That one changed how I treat every wooden thing I own. I'll see you there. Now, this video gave you the overview, but stay with me inside the Old Ways Almanac, and I'll pick up right where we left off with the Lifetime Steel Hull Care Plan, coat by coat. In there, you can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself, never a machine. And you won't be alone. Old Ways folks like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. Cancel anytime, no risk at all. Now, if a steel hull surprised you, wait until you see how the right boat gives you everything you need without going bigger or spending more. I'll show you exactly how it works. It's starting right now.